Hi everyone, we're going to be talking about the Atlantic revolutions, particularly the French and the American revolutions in this short presentation. However, before we proceed with this, we would like to first look at the big questions. What is a revolution? Well, it's a forcible overthrow of a government or social order in favor of a new system. Basically, we have one government, one social system, and we replace it with another. Also, when we talk about revolutions, it's important to look at the causes. And causes usually are multiple and complex, so we cannot really boil down the origin of a revolution just to one cause. Also, there are long and short-term causes. Now, the long-term causes are usually structural. There are some sort of accumulating events and actions that led to this revolution. For example, on the eve of the French Revolution, we have the whole economic, social, and political system of Europe was extremely oppressive. But this wasn't the result just of one person's action. This was the accumulation of the actions of people, of individuals through time. And then we have this sort of a structural cause of the revolution. Also, we have short-term causes, things that just happened that triggered the revolution. For example, we may have famine due to failing crops, raising of taxes, which happened at the beginning of both the French and the American Revolution. There were sort of unintended events or consequences of events that can contribute to the beginning of a revolution. And there's also something that we call contingency. Contingency means that events were not preordained. Events didn't have to happen the way they did. And especially with the French Revolution, we see that events unfold day by day, sort of in unpredictable fashion. And now with the hindsight, we look at the revolution and we say, well, but this is how it was supposed to happen. But that's not really necessarily the case. For example, the king might have not been executed, guillotined, so the revolution might have not ever become a radical one. But so this is that thing that we need to have in mind when we study the causes of the revolutions. Also, when we speak about revolutions, we talk about stages. And there is a historian by the name of Crane Brinton who wrote The Autonomy of Revolution. And in this book, he looks at the stages of several revolutions, and he says that political revolutions have similar stages of progression. They start with economic upheaval, and this economic upheaval usually was triggered by crop failure, famine, big food prices, also rebellion against an existing order. This is now the second stage. You have an economic upheaval, then there are demonstrations, and then the existing government was overthrown. And then we have, perhaps sort of a more moderate stage. In the case of the French Revolution, this is the stage of the constitutional monarchy. There's still some elements from the previous regime. The monarchical elements still exist, but then there are new elements, the constitution. So this is the moderate stage. And then violence against the moderates occurs by more radical members of the rebels, and we go to the radical stage. So from revolutions progress from a moderate stage to a radical stage. And then things go so much out of control that we need a powerful dictator to come and restore order. Now we're going to look at the background of the Atlantic revolutions. Two different developments set the foundation for the Atlantic revolutions. The first one is in the sphere of ideas. This is the European Enlightenment. And the second one was the 7 Years' War, arguably one of the first or the first global war. So let's first look at the European Enlightenment. What was it? It was an intellectual movement somewhere roughly between 1720 and 1820. It was an European movement, mostly among educated elite, and all these Enlightenment thinkers that were known as the philosophers, they shared certain ideas. They proposed the idea, a very radical idea at the time, that human societies can be improved through human actions. Humans are rational beings. So, because they're rational beings, we can organize also society rationally. So they began to attack any systems that are not based on rationality. For example, absolute monarchy. So the philosophers, the Enlightenment thinkers, they challenged the foundations of absolute monarchy. They challenged the foundation of hereditary aristocracy. They challenged the authority of the church. Among those philosophers, perhaps one of the most influential ones was John Locke. John Locke wrote a treatise of government in which he proposes the idea that the authority of government comes from the people in the form of a contract. And humans make two contracts. The first, to form a civil society, and the second, to form government. Locke believes that human beings form government to protect their lives, liberty, and property. The duty of the government is basically to protect those fundamental rights. Now, if a government fails to do that, if a government fails to protect the rights of its citizens, then those citizens, the people, can cancel their contract with their rulers. They can depose their rulers, and they can elect new leaders. And that would sort of happen orderly. There will be no chaos because people have not dissolved their contract of civil society. Now, other middle class people, like Locke himself, they possessed freedoms and properties, and they were determined to protect them from the chains of absolute monarchs. Now, these ideas will influence the revolutionaries both in France and the American colonies. These revolutionaries, they all read these philosophers. They all share these Enlightenment ideas. They all share the ideas of liberty, of equality, of free trade, of religious tolerance. Some of them propose the idea of republicanism, getting rid of monarchy completely. They share the idea of human rationality. Again, I would like to stress the fact that this idea to get rid of a monarch and to govern by a government representing the people was revolutionary in the 18th century. There were no representative governments. Monarchy was the norm. Now, before moving to the 7 Years' War, let's look at the Atlantic revolutions and their global impact. Now, so what were the important outcomes of the Atlantic revolutions? Let's first look at their limitations. Now, the goal of these revolutions was to expand the political rights of people. But not everybody benefit from these revolutions. Let's see who benefit from them. Well, it was the white men with property. Those were the ones who benefit from the revolution. Those were the members of this middle class. But who was excluded? Well, women didn't benefit. They didn't get the right to vote. Slaves remained slaves in the American colonies or in the newly established free state of the United States. Native Americans, the indigenous people, they didn't benefit from the revolution. Men without property also didn't benefit. Now, even though all those groups of people didn't have immediate benefit, they actually will embrace the ideas of the revolution to promote their own cause. They will use these ideas to fight for universal suffrage, first universal male suffrage and then universal suffrage for both men and women. They will work for the emancipation of slaves and serfs and for the rights of the indigenous people. Now, the French Revolution, it went through a moderate phase to a radical phase, and then order was restored by Napoleon. And Napoleon's armies conquered most of Europe, and in the process they spread the ideas and principles of the French Revolution. And many countries will be inspired by the French Revolution. They will be inspired to abolish slavery, to expand the right to vote. They will develop constitutions modeled after the American Constitution and after the two constitutions of the French Revolution. And they would fight to secure better equality for women. Also, an outcome from the French Revolution particularly is the idea of nationalism. Nationalism, the idea of belonging to a nation, sort of originated within France when the French people had conscription army, the first mass draft, and they began to fight for France itself, for the nation itself, rather than in the name of the king. And the idea of nationalism would sort of spread throughout Europe, and all those other countries that were fighting against the French, they began to developing their own national consciousness in opposition to France. France being viewed as an oppressor and they as the nation fighting for their own independence. And also the idea of human equality. This idea of human equality will be found in feminist, socialist and communist movements. The United Nations adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, and that declaration was modeled after the French Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizens.